Welcome to our political forum on the state of the Peninsula, and I'm glad you can be here tonight. My name is Cher Wolf, and I'm the chairperson of the Cultural Affairs Committee. And I'd like to thank the following committee members for helping us make this possible: Beth Beasley, Gerald Safko, James Del Valle, Jean Gordon, Marilyn Starks, Mary Howard, Mike Goodion, Sandra Spain, Sue Silverhorn, Susan Lawler. Those are the Cultural Affairs Committee who all helped bring the delegates here tonight. The format tonight I want to explain to you briefly. This is going to be a very informal discussion. The political science classes and the economics classes have put their heads together and come up with some questions to ask the delegates. I want to introduce you to our moderator. Our moderator tonight is going to be Betty Thomas. Betty is a communications instructor at Thomas Nelson, and she's formerly the debate coach for William & Mary. So I would like to introduce you to Thomas Nelson's Ted Koppel, our moderator, Betty Thomas.
If I would have known I was going to be compared to Ted Koppel, I would have had my hair colored. I didn't notice until tonight when I was trying to look better than my usual day how much gray I had. We were talking about that out there. So if we do this again and I come next year, it'll be a new me, what can I say? We were really fortunate tonight to have our two delegates, and I'll say 2.5, because our third delegate will be here a little bit later. He had a little bit of a conflict. What Cher and the committee did was invite all of the Peninsula delegates to be able to participate in the forum. And fortunately, 3 of them were able to make that and work that into the busy schedule, and we really appreciate it. She indicated this is going to be a round table and that the questions were devised by the political science class, which is true. And I have those hermetically designed questions right here in my hand. Never have been seen except by the delegates ahead of time and by the people in the class. And what we're going to do is allow each of them a chance to respond. I have Delegate Hamilton in his absence for the first part's answers to those questions, and I'll alternate giving you his answer and allow them to give their views on the topic as well. And then at other times I'll let him finish up, even though he hasn't had the opportunity of hearing theirs. We didn't really have a formal time limit. We were thinking something along the line of 5 minutes each. And being a speech teacher, as she told you, I did bring my timer. So what I will be doing from time to time is popping up and sort of cueing them that we might want to move on to another question. We have 24 questions, and we want to try to, if possible, include as many of those as possible. How many possibles is that in one sentence? I think that's 3, not good. But we want to try to include as many questions as we possibly can, 4, and allow the students an opportunity to get the responses that they've sought. Sort of a housekeeping thing before I introduce the 2 delegates we have here and give them a chance for some opening remarks. If you find a need that you must leave before it's over to go out and then to come back, please use the side door in the back where you see the student ambassador standing. These 2 doors in the back clunk very loudly, and everybody will turn around and look at you if you go out or if you come in that way. And obviously the front ones aren't very convenient. There will be light refreshments at the end of the forum. The delegates have indicated they would be willing to answer questions. We may not have time for that during the formal ceremony, so if you want to stick around afterwards for refreshments, and of course I always do, you might want to be able to ask them the questions that you have that come to mind based on the instances we have. Like Cher said, we have 3 delegates, well, like I said, 2 in our shadow one on Delegate Hamilton tonight, and we're really anxious to have them. I'm going to introduce both of them and give them each of an opportunity to do some opening remarks. Immediately to my right, we have Delegate Glenn Oder. He's been a member of the House of Representatives for a very long time, since 2002, and he represents the 94th District. That includes parts of Newport News, my hometown, yay, so had a chance to vote for him. Glad that he's here. To his right is Delegate Barlow, William Barlow. He's been a member a little bit longer, since 1992. I forgot to mention that Delegate Oder is a Republican, so I guess that gave a lot of weight for me. But Delegate Barlow is a Democrat, and I've been known to vote for them as well, depending on what they're saying. He represents the 64th District. That's Isle of Wight County, parts of that, James City County, Southampton, Surrey, Franklin, and Williamsburg. And I might add, both of these gentlemen, as is Delegate Hamilton, I'll introduce him when he comes, have been very supportive of education and specifically of our needs here, and we really appreciate that. I think the evidence of them being here tonight includes that. So without further ado, one of those normal comments you're not supposed to make in speeches, right? I'd like to allow Delegate Oder to make a few opening remarks, and then Delegate Barlow, and then we'll start asking the questions.
Thank you very much for having me here tonight. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Thank you for all the phone calls and emails and the questions and so forth to get us started. I just want to say it's interesting that one of the things that we're all labeled with is our party labels, whether we're Republican or Democrat. I will tell you that coming from the city of Newport News, it's my estimation, and these are not facts, but it's my estimation that Newport News is probably about 40% Republican and about 30% Democrat, and that leaves about 30% of people who vote strictly for the person. So if you're not the right person, you're not going to get the job. I learned a long time ago, it's not party politics, it's being the right person that's going to allow you to be a good public servant. So that's what I try to be. I'm going to be very brief with my opening comments, and I just simply want to say that you can't have a State of the Peninsula address this week, at least, without talking about the transportation referendum. It's obviously a time for us to look back at an incredible vote, something that I have not found anybody on either side, in any camp, in any walk of life, that even remotely could have predicted that the turnout and the outcome would have been the size that it was. And I will give you a little behind the scenes look. The governor called me yesterday and I wanted to talk, and I'll tell you exactly what I told the governor. He said, "What do you think happened?" And I said, well, the message that I get out of this, governor, is that there are two things. First, it's a lack of trust in government. And I believe that goes directly back to the lottery. And we can get into the minutiae of all that, but that's what I heard. It was a lack of trust in government, and that lack of trust was based on the fact that the lottery funds years ago were supposed to be, or people were told they were going to be dedicated towards education, and they weren't used for education. They are now, but they weren't at the time when we all allowed the lottery to be created. The second thing was a lack of confidence in VDOT. And he said, well, how do you attribute that, or how do you characterize a lack of confidence in VDOT? And I said, Governor, we have people who drive by road projects in Hampton Roads. They don't know why they're being built. I mean, who decided that that was an important project? They don't understand why equipment is not moving up and down and pushing dirt and laying asphalt. And they don't understand why we're giving them the paper that one of their cost overruns on every project that's ever been started around here. I said, there's a tremendous lack of confidence. He said, well, don't you think it has something to do with people who didn't want to raise their taxes? I said, exactly. I said, they don't want to raise their taxes for an organization they didn't trust and a group of workers that they didn't have confidence in. Why would you give money to an organization that you have neither trust nor confidence in? So I think that that's, in my mind, when you distill it all down, there are lots of small issues, but for me, that was the big ticket. We've got to restore trust, and we have to restore confidence in VDOT. So when I woke up the next morning after the vote, what I decided was the way to get trust was to do that on an individual basis. I need to make sure that my friends and my neighbors and my constituents trust me. And I've got to do what I say that I'm going to do, and I've got to make sure that I don't do anything to offend that trust. The second thing is that we've got to fix VDOT. And there are many ways and many things that need to be done to fix VDOT. And we can do that policy-wise, and we can do it legislatively. And I'll have you know that I've been working basically since I was elected and put on the Transportation Committee to fix VDOT, and I'm having meetings with them right now, and I'm giving them suggestions of things that need to be fixed. That if they can't fix them policy-wise, then I'll be happy to do it legislatively. And finally, I think also as we talk about the state of the peninsula, that this word picture that I'm going to present to you really gives a really clear idea of where I'm afraid the peninsula is. And maybe even an area larger than the peninsula. Maybe all of Hampton Roads, maybe even all of Virginia, for all I know. If $1 billion were to suddenly appear in Richmond, and it was extra money, and somehow that entire $1 billion was to be sent to the Hampton Roads region, or for the purposes of tonight's conversation, to the peninsula. And you were asked, there are 5 things that you could spend that $1 billion on. The first you could spend it on would be roads. We know what road projects we think are important. So you could fund one or part of one of those road projects. You could spend the money, too, on education. you could spend the money on mental health, or 4, you could spend it on Medicaid or Medicare or some sort of a health-related issues, or 5, you could divide the money up among all the taxpayers and get a tax rebate. I have a serious concern that the issue would be number 5, that most taxpayers would think, if you've got an extra $1 billion, you probably collected too much, we give you enough money as it is, we don't think that you spend the money that you get wisely, therefore, if you've got extra money, send it back to us. I hope that's not as callous as I think it is, as I think it sounded, but I just think that's pretty much part of the message that I got out of yesterday. And I hope that forums like this and open dialogue and discussion will help me see otherwise, or will help us all have a better understanding of the state of the peninsula and where we need to go. Thank you.
I'm Bill Barlow. I guess I'm sort of a transitional person here. In the redistricting process, which I didn't have a whole lot to do with, in the redistricting process, Delegate George Grayson and I, who represented the Williamsburg, James City area for some 28 years, were put in the same district. Not an odd coincidence. And George decided to retire. So I was reelected, fortunately, and I represent both sides of the river. I live in the Smithfield community of Isle of Wight County. I represent practically all of that county, one precinct in Southampton County, one in the city of Franklin, all of Surrey County. And then I come over on the north side of the river and represent all the city of Williamsburg and 5 precincts in James City County. So I feel like I'm trying to represent the interest on both sides of the river. And unfortunately, this election that we had on Tuesday, I'm afraid if we're talking about a united region of Hampton roads, that was not a good day Tuesday, because it looks like we're going to be in for some rough times ahead in regard to regional unity. I am pleased to be here at an educational facility like Thomas Nelson Community College tonight. I come from a family of educators. I'm the baby of the family. I'm the 5th of 5 children. All of my family were educated with the exception of my father. My mother was a principal of a small school. My oldest brother was a teacher in high school. My sister was a teacher. My older sister was a teacher. My brother was chairman of the school board in the city of Suffolk for many years. My sister Sarah, maybe some of you knew her, Sarah Barlow Wright, was principal of Hilton Elementary School here in Newport News for a number of years. And then I'm the only one that didn't go into education. I'm an attorney. Let me just say this in regard to what's happened on Tuesday. This was a very important election, and it's going to be a long time before we're going to be able to determine exactly what it all means. Because as Glenn has said, the transportation referendum going down 62 to 38 was very surprising. I thought it was going to be close. Both Glenn and I supported it. We wrote articles in the newspaper in support of it. We went out on the limb. The limb has been sawed off. Glenn said maybe the whole tree has come down, not just one limb. But in any event, we felt it was the best thing to do. Obviously, the voters of our region thought just the opposite. So we're going to have to gather our thoughts together and keep going. The main thing is we cannot quit. We cannot say there is, I mean, we can say it, but it's not true. We can't say that there is no problem or there is not going to be any problem. There is certainly a problem now, in my opinion, in transportation, and there is going to be a continuing, increasing problem in transportation. And the longer we delay, the longer we put off groping with that problem, the more difficulty we're going to have in solving it. So it's extremely important that we move on from here. I hope those who, particularly those leaders who opposed it, will now come up with their proposals. Many of the proposals they mentioned we had already looked at and realized, or we felt very strongly that people were not going to support it. and I still feel that way. But if they want to propose it, they'll certainly consider, and maybe some of those proposals will pass, such as increasing the gas tax dramatically, or putting tolls on many roads. That might fly, but we didn't think that it would. But we can't dwell on that. We're not elected to look backwards. We're elected to look forward and never quit. Keep on trying to solve these problems. Let me just close by briefly saying something in regard to education. Frankly, we're very pleased, of course, the higher education bond referendum did pass very handily, but still we have the problem of operating expenses, and that you all are coping with every day. And that is where I have a fear in regard to the transportation referendum result. I'm afraid that that's encouraged a lot of those who are just saying we just got to keep cutting and cutting and cutting, that this is going to encourage them greatly. We've already heard some of the leadership in the House of Delegates say there's not going to be any additional revenue. This settles the question. The vote the people have spoken on Tuesday. I, for one, feel that we've got to look at education and feel and realize that that is our highest priority. And when I say our highest priority, second only perhaps to public safety. And we've got to continue to offer opportunities for our young people. If we don't, the future is bleak indeed. I think we can do it, but we've got to get the consensus and move forward and do it. Thank you.
Some of the issues you both raised will be ones we'll be covering tonight. But the first question that we have is a little different. I'm going to read the question and then Delegate Hamilton's response. And then it will switch the order. We'll start with Delegate Barlow. What legislative action can be taken to help preserve and protect the Chesapeake Bay and the environment on the peninsula? Delegate Hamilton said, I believe the existing Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act is a step in the right direction. Local governments need to follow the existing law and need to stop granting exemptions to it. Okay? Delegate Barlow?
Well, I believe we're on question 15. I think I agree essentially with what Phil has said. I don't think there are any particular new initiatives we need to take in regard to the Chesapeake Bay laws, but I do think they need to be enforced and enforced rigidly by the localities. Now, I will say this, as an attorney, I've got a case right now where I think the localities are enforcing it a bit too rigidly, in that I've got a lot on a lake that does not go into the Chesapeake Bay. It's a lake. I mean, no water flows into the Chesapeake Bay, but they say the Chesapeake Bay law applies to it. It doesn't seem to make much sense to me. But with exceptions like that, I think for the most part, we've got to continue to encourage and insist that our localities enforce the laws in that regard to keep our environment sound.
I think that there are a lot of laws that govern this, and they do need to be enforced. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. There's a video. It's probably about 25 years old now, so who knows? It really should be updated. Somebody should go back and research it and see it, and see if I guess the suppositions that were made in that video are still true today. But what they did in this video, it's really an interesting movie. There was a group of scientists, and they set out to prove why were the grasses declining in the bay. One of the things that you could talk about the health of the bay is, and I know when I was a kid, I spent my entire life in Newport News, growing up in Newport News, we used to have to go and find a place to go swimming where there wasn't seaweed, because there was seaweed everywhere. So we'd actually look for a lighter area where there wasn't any seaweed, and we'd try to play in that area where you could see the sandy bottom. Now it's just like a desert out there. There's hardly any seaweed anywhere. Well, this video had these dramatic diagrams showing how the grasses have been reduced in the bay. The grasses are very, very important to the bay for many reasons. And what they did was they figured, it's probably all the chemicals. It's chemicals for people's lawns, it's chemicals for farmers. It's all these chemicals that kill the grass in the bay. All the things that we put in our farms to kill the grass in the fields. in the crops. So they started monitoring like ditches next to farmland, and then where the ditches turned into streams, where the streams turned into small, larger streams, and finally dumped in the river. And the chemicals in the ditches were off the chart. I mean, you just can't imagine anything could ever live there. It was like Love Canal. But by the time it got to the river, it was so diluted that it disappeared. They couldn't even find it anymore. And so it was interesting because the video showed that they didn't know what the problem was. And so they had to go back, and you went through this process with the scientists. They go back into the room, they huddle up, they start brainstorming as to what the issue was. And somebody came up with the idea that they thought it was because of erosion. And so what they did was they found grass in the bay, and they would make these domes that would go over the grasses, and then inside the dome there was a light cell that would measure the amount of light that was getting down to the grasses. And they, of course, found the optimum depth of the grasses and those kind of things. And sure enough, it would rain, and when it would rain, all the runoff that would carry all the silt into the James River would cloud the water. And even though the rain had stopped and the clouds had gone away and the sunlight was back out, the silt that was in the water was so diffracting the light rays that the grasses couldn't grow. And then when it all settled, where did it settle? But it settled on the grasses. And so the grasses still couldn't carry out photosynthesis. And so that was what they determined was the decline of the bay. And what frustrates me about that is we have the laws on the books for siltation ponds, for sediment erosion control measures. We have all those, and you can ride by construction site after construction site, and you'll see where those things are not being maintained. And so I really feel like that's a really good practical example where we need to see our laws more practically employed so that we can maintain the health of the bay. And of course, there's many other things we need to do. And this will sound like, I just think that that's one example that I can tell you that's very, very tangible. We need to make sure that the laws that we currently have are being completely and strictly enforced. And I'm willing to consider other laws as well if we can show that there's a net result that they will certainly help the health of the bay.
Thank you. We threw them a curve a little bit. We did send the questions ahead of time, and then prior to their getting here, we changed the order. So I'm going to give them what the order of the number is. Number 16 is next.
Very nice.
Okay, thank you.
It's nice to have a question in front of you.
It really is, because that's the reason that they actually took time to think about it ahead of time. The second question for us, their number 16, is what do you predict will be necessary to turn the economy around? And then after that, how long do you think it will take? Do you want to start, Doug?
Yeah, are you going to read Doug and Hampton's?
Well, I can. Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay, since it's not a debate and it's a roundtable.
Sure.
Restoring consumer confidence is critical to turning the economy around, and they've already alluded to that. By reducing interest rates, which of course you all noticed happened just recently, to the lowest level they've been in years, there's been an effort by the Federal Reserve Board to stimulate the economy. I suspect the recovery is still 12 to 18 months away. Even when the recovery occurs, however, it will take additional months for the benefits to be realized in additional state revenue. Okay?
What I understand, Delegate Hamilton's exactly right. Delegate Hamilton's a good person to answer this. He sits on appropriations, and he and Delegate Barlow have so much more experience in this. But when I go up as a freshman and I ask the questions, basically what the staff for appropriations is telling me is that once you see the economy start to turn around, and Phil has predicted 12 to 18 months. I hope he's correct. I hope he's wrong. I hope it happens sooner. But once we all begin to realize that the economy is turned around, that it's about 12 to 18 months after that before the revenue actually shows up in the state budget. So when you wake up one morning and somebody in the news or somebody in the newspaper or whatever is pointing to specific things which show the economy is back and we're rolling again, and maybe that indicator would be the stock market, maybe it would be housing sales, maybe it would be unemployment. When you see that happen, you can figure that it'll still be 12 to 18 months before somebody from Richmond says, well, finally we've got a little bit extra money to spend. I think that the frightening thing for all of us is that other than the stock market, I mean, my personal life, I don't really see a significant financial problem. I mean, I don't go to the grocery store and find the groceries are all that much more expensive. I don't go to the gas station and find gas is all that much more expensive. And so I'm sitting here, I mean, I realize that the economy is down because I read about it every day in the paper. But I really have very little that I can point to specifically. And so that really scares me. And so I wonder what it is that I'm looking for to see things start to improve. Will I see my groceries go down in price? Will I see gasoline go down in price? Will I see interest rates go down, interest rates are already down. So I'm still in a quandary as to trying to figure out where on earth this almost $6 billion deficit that the governor's had to deal with, what created it, other than a couple things that we know about. So my comment on this is when you see it start to turn around, then it's still going to be a while before we will see the benefit.
Well, I think it is going to be a while before we see the turnaround, and I think the most important point is that we're going to really have to act very cautiously and very carefully at the state level. You know, we had 8 years of economic prosperity that this country has never before seen, may never see again. And during that period, it was easy to fall into the idea of revenue was always going to increase. A lot of times double-digit increases in revenue. When you got that revenue, there's so many needs that the Commonwealth has, it's very easy to go ahead and spend that money. But we didn't put the brakes on in time. I, for one, thought that in regard to the car tax cut, which I voted for the car tax cut, but we had in there triggers that would say if the economy went down, revenue wasn't there, then those triggers would come into play and it would slow down the tax cut. I think we made a major mistake when we went from 47.5% to 70% phase out for the car tax. There were many of us in the General Assembly that voted to try to you know, cut that in half, meet the Senate halfway. That went down by 20 votes in the House of Delegates. Now that was certainly not the sole cause of our problem, but it was one of the causes. And in the future, we're going to have to be very careful about making sure that our revenues are sufficient to meet our needs. I hope that we don't have to go through this again anytime soon. We've got a further uncertainty in regard to the economy because we have no idea what's going to happen in the international realm in the way of any war with Iraq or any other nation. That, of course, is completely uncertain. We don't know what the situation is there. But we've got to cope with terrorism. We've got to have public safety foremost, even above education. And therefore, when you get in a situation like that, you've got to spend whatever it takes to win.
Incidentally, if you all want to make other comments after the other person spoke, feel free. Okay, just let me know. Just start my line. Anything to say. Okay, the next question is number 12 on your list. Do you think the relative lack of roads in this area has a negative impact on the local economy? Does it prevent international and domestic corporations from relocating here? And following our pattern, I guess I'll indicate what Delegate Hamilton said. If Hampton Roads does not improve its current transportation network, it could possibly lead to a stagnation of economic development throughout the region. It could negatively impact also new businesses from locating in the region and might even cause existing businesses to relocate. Which of you would like to start?
I'll go ahead and start. I think Phil wrote that before Tuesday, I guess.
Yeah, it was.
And as I indicated earlier, I strongly supported the referendum, the transportation referendum, because I really feel very strongly that in this area, if we don't get control of this transportation problem, that the economy is going to continue to go down. It's going to be hard to maintain a quality of life here. It's going to be very hard to keep the businesses that we have. It's going to be difficult to recruit new businesses into the area, because obviously that's one of the major things they look at is a good transportation system. We have an area here in Hampton Roads that is so unique and so wonderful, because it's my home. I've been here all my life. But to have the world-class ports, I'm going to say it's the best port in the world here, to have the military installations that we have, the educational facilities that we have, the businesses that we enjoy having here. Tourism is certainly very significant, and all of these are dependent on the lifeblood provided by the transportation system. If we can't move around, there's lifeblood in our veins. If it can't move, we've got a major problem. And it may not happen overnight, but it's getting worse and worse in a steady way. And I think that unless we get control of this problem, it's the future of our area is not going to be that good. That's why I felt it was so important. And having said that, I realize that it's human nature that we're not going to do anything until a crisis comes. But I think that's a very short-sighted view, and if the crisis comes, it's either going to be too late or it's going to be too expensive or very expensive, much more expensive than it is now to cope with it.
I think Delegate Barlow is exactly right. You know, we don't think about it very much because we've lived here most of our lives. If we've moved here, you don't hear those of us who've lived here talk about it. But the Port of Hampton Roads is absolutely unbelievable. I mean, it's why Collins P. Huntington built a railroad all the way to the end of this peninsula, was because it was this natural deep water port that's just perfect for shipping. And it's very, very vital. You know, our port, we really need to dig the channel 55 feet deep. When I was a kid and I heard talking about going from 50 feet to 55 feet deep in the channel out there, it was because the coal colliers were so large. These super coal colliers they were making were so large that they were actually coming to Hampton Roads, filling up with coal, but not quite filling up because they actually were having to leave on a high tide and drag a bottom at 50 feet, going out of our port. They'd go to Africa and get the rest of the coal, and then they'd go on to Japan. But they couldn't even fill up here because our port wasn't deep enough. Our channel is 5 feet deeper than the Baltimore channel, which goes up to Baltimore. Now, the coal is drying up in Southwest Virginia. We don't have the coal that we used to, but we still need to dig the channel. You know why? Because we now have container ships that are going to start to draw 55 feet. They're so big. Nobody, I think, could have imagined what container cargo would be in this country today. And it's right here in Hampton Roads, and it means jobs. Now, somebody's going to sit back and say, well, I don't want all those container tractor trailers going up and down my highway. Let me tell you what we do. It's a smart plan. There's something called an inland port in Front Royal, Virginia, and most of those containers get put on the train, and they go by train all the way up to Front Royal, and there they get put on tractor trailers and go up and down 81. It's a great plan. We, in the Shipping Association in Hampton Roads, it affects 164,000 jobs in Hampton Roads. I mean, that's how significant this is. And so you say, well, you know, the question is, will people move here or people not move here? Absolutely. If they can't move their ships around, if they can't move their cargo around, if people can't get to work, they'll go find somewhere else. Just to give you an idea how much it costs $50,000 a day to operate a container ship. If that container ship decides that it can't go to the Port of Hampton Roads, that it has to go to the Port of Baltimore, it costs a half day to get there and a half day back. It's an extra $50,000 for the exact same product. Everything's the same. It just costs an extra $50,000 to transport that cargo if it doesn't come to Hampton Roads. So yes, it is very important. Transportation is absolutely critical to our health and our ability to move around. It's as critical, as Delegate Barlow said, as the blood in your veins. Welcome, Delegate Hamilton.
Obviously, with all those details, you're much smarter than I am.
Our third delegate is here, and I'm so glad. I didn't really feel I was doing honor reading his words. But this is Delegate Philip Hamilton. He's from the 93rd District. He's been in Congress and our delegate since 1988. He represents James City County and part of Newport News, and was my daughter's, well, middle school, I guess, principal. I had the opportunity to meet him when she and her friend were writing notes back and forth about when and how they were going to smoke. Who was going to get the lighter, who was going to get the cigarettes. And I remember him quite well from that experience.
And obviously, I did a very good job at handling it.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know if I still had to name your parents, but I
No, he did very well. She didn't start smoking until she was 22. But now, we'll move on to another question. Unfortunately, Delegate Hamilton will be here to answer. And as I told the other gentleman, we're kind of taking turns, but if you want to respond to each other or make
If you read my answers, you did just fine.
So far, so
So
good.
far.
Now we'll get some of the no, just teasing. Okay, the next question is question number 8, Delegate Hamilton and Carlin. Over. We changed the order, so to try to confuse you, I think. What are your feelings about how to reduce the unemployment rate? And Delegate Hamilton, since you're here, why don't you start?
So obviously, in order to reduce the unemployment rate, you've got to create jobs. And, you know, it sounds very easy, but government's not the one that ought to be creating jobs. Government ought to be the ones creating the climate in which the private sector will create the jobs. And that means maintaining positive business environment through workers' compensation rates, unemployment rates, low taxation, having an infrastructure where goods and services and people can be moved easily so that the consumer products can get where they need to go and the people can get to their jobs. A lot of things involved in it, and it's not so much state government. A lot of what we end up having to manipulate is a result of federal actions. And you know, one of the issues related to the transportation referendum Tuesday was about jobs, because it is about moving people, it is about moving goods and services. And time will tell what type of negative impact that vote may have, because clearly the ports would have benefited significantly from that transportation referendum. I happen to be one that thinks the ports are productive jobs, and they are a contributor, significant contributor to the economy of Virginia. So when you're talking about the unemployment rate, very complex issue, but it's all about maintaining a positive business climate and making sure you've got the infrastructure to get goods, services, and workers where they need to go in a timely and convenient fashion.
I'll just add to that, and we just decided among ourselves, there's no need to repeat everything that's been said, but I do want to mention that when I talk to businesses that are thinking of moving in the area, probably the most significant thing that they want to know about is your workforce training programs. It's the number one thing. They can work through a lot of details, but if you've got a great workforce training program, especially a place where they can actually come in and help train their workers, then it's unbelievable the benefit that has. Obviously, a facility like Thomas Nelson and the workforce training department that's right here on this campus is absolutely exceptional to increasing our ability to bring new industry and good paying jobs into our community.
I don't think I have anything to add other than the main ingredients that we need is first of all public safety, secondly the educational opportunities that have just been discussed, and third the transportation is so important, and many other factors, but those are some of the main ones. And I think in regard to the educational opportunities, it's just crucial that we be able to give our young people the opportunities to be the best that they can be. This is the fair thing to do. This is the just thing to do. This is the thing that is needed for us to have a vision of a country that will continue to be a great one.
Certainly agree with that. The next question on your list, gentlemen, is number 3. Our professors haven't had raises in over 2 years. Right. Not even for the cost of living. Our classes are getting cut and more crowded. Our tuition is going up. We're getting less for more. Might I add that we have uncertified teachers teaching in the public elementary and secondary schools. What does the General Assembly plan to do to stem the exodus of good teachers from this area?
Well, I'll start at this end on that. I've indicated earlier, but my background as far as education is concerned, my wife, I didn't mention her, my wife is an elementary school teacher. She's lead teacher at Wyndham Elementary School. So I hear it every day and every night, what we need to do for education, what we're not doing for education. I tell you, this is something that really concerns me. There's not a single member of the General Assembly that doesn't say that they're all for education. But the problem is that although all of them say that, not all of them vote that way. And it's awfully hard, extremely hard for citizens such as you to determine how they voted. I had a call today from a daily press report on an entirely unrelated subject. He was calling in regard to apparently York County, which I don't even represent, but York County and other counties in the area are sort of pushing for something that I proposed last year, which was allowing counties to impose a cigarette tax if they want to. They don't have to do one, but they could. Right now, the state of Virginia says cities, you can tax cigarettes. Towns, you can tax cigarettes. But counties, you are forbidden to tax cigarettes. You have to rely on the real estate tax and other such revenues for your educational purposes. You can't tax cigarettes. Some of the counties are getting kind of angry about that, and I say the Daily Press guy called me today on that subject. But I said, he said, what happened to your bill last year? And I said, well, you can look at what happened on February the 4th in the Finance Committee. And I told him the vote was 18-4 against it. Actually, I looked back, it was 18-3. 3 people voted in favor of it, 18 voted against allowing. This was just to allow the locality to vote on it in a referendum. Didn't say you had to do it, just said you all would have the opportunity to vote on it. The vote was, don't even let the local people vote on that. So these are the types of things that concern me, that we're doing things like that that are harmful to education. And yet we'll go ahead and say at groups like this how strong we support education, and yet we'll go ahead and take votes like that that are almost directly opposite to what we're expressing. I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I just want you all to understand that it's going to be a tough fight. I indicated earlier that this transportation referendum, I think the one reason that Governor Warner was pushing this so hard was that he wanted to win those 2 transportation referendums. And one reason he wanted to win them not only was for transportation, but I think he wanted to see that the people of Virginia wanted to move on into an area that he is even more interested in, and that's education, and are willing to step up to the plate and put up the money for education. The defeat of the transportation referendum to those 2 regions on Tuesday has not meant that we will not have improved funding for education, but it has certainly weakened the support for education, in my opinion. But the main thing is we can't quit. Education is vital. We've got to fight, continue fighting, and hopefully one of these days Virginia will again be a leader in education, not only K through 12, but also continue to have the great system of higher education that we've had for so many years.
You know, when we campaigned last year, you could go to anybody's website, you could listen to any speech, and you could hear them say mainly this: we're going to raise teacher salaries to where they're at least the national average. And then you get a candidate who say, that's not even good enough for me, it's got to be above the national average. My campaign slogan was, we're going to raise teacher salaries to where they're the highest paid in the South, which was just about the national average. And where I got that from was basically, it was a VEA document that I saw that came out, and it referred to the fact that Virginia used to have the highest paid teachers in the South, but we're now number 3rd. I don't know where we are now, but my guess is we probably have fallen below that. The problem is that you get to Richmond, and of course, how are you going to do that, Mr. Oder, if you get elected? If you become delegate, how are you going to do it? Oh, prioritize. It's going to be our highest priority to raise teachers' salaries. It never even hits the radar screen once you get to Richmond. It's not that it doesn't hit my radar screen, it's the people that are making the decisions. Somebody said, well, you know, can't you go to the Appropriations Committee? I said, I don't even know where they meet. I know. I bet you found it and went up there with Phil. And Phil, to his credit, Phil put in just amendment after amendment, and he's going to tell you about those. I won't steal his thunder. But I'll tell you, you can sit on the floor of the House like I did, and probably Delegate Barlin did as well, and vote for every single funding opportunity that comes in front of you to increase funding for education, and it doesn't pass. And I just simply don't understand. So with that, I'll let Phil do it. The only thing I conclude is, I can conclude from all this, is that you're gonna, in order to do something for education, you're gonna have to find a revenue source, and you're gonna have to target it. That revenue source, you're gonna target it for education.
Well, while the question was specific to education, it's just a small part of a larger problem, and Delegate Barlow addressed it in some respects. When you look at budget, you look at your budget at home, there's at least two things that you have to take into consideration: revenues and expenditures. But when you're talking about larger budgets, say for organizations, companies, businesses, or even something called government, there's usually two more things that come into play, and that's needs and priorities. And I will tell you right now in Virginia, I haven't been able to find a whole lot of people that are willing to talk about needs, willing to talk about priorities, and certainly very few that are even willing to talk about revenues. So I keep hearing that everything's on the table and there's this crisis. Well, from my perspective, if everything is on the table, I understand what everything means. But everything doesn't mean what you think it means in Virginia. It only means expenditures. And we're going to cut and cut and cut until your tuitions continue to go higher and higher. Professors and teachers leave. People that need mental health services can't get those services, so they either end up showing up in emergency rooms or jails, which are much more expensive. Unless we get the political courage to have a discussion. It doesn't cost anything to talk about it. But we've got people who are afraid to even talk about it. And revenues doesn't necessarily mean tax increases. Currently, $3.6 billion is lost in revenue in the state of Virginia because of the sales tax exemptions that we have authorized. $400 to $500 million is lost in revenue because several years ago we gave in and gave an age deduction from income taxes to where everyone gets an $800 deduction. If you're age 62 to 64, you get a $6,000 deduction added to that. If you're 65 and older, you get a $12,000 deduction added to that. So there's a lot of things built into our budget that we don't have the courage to even talk about. So if you want to start to address this particular issue with teacher salaries and professor salaries, you've got to generate in some folks the willingness to even talk about revenues. Virginia currently is the 46th highest tax state out of 50. We're 12th in per capita wealth. So there's a great disparity between our potential to generate revenues and our willingness to do it. And when you look at item after item, Virginia has the distinction of being below 25th in a lot of things, being below 40th in too many things. And public education is probably what we do best, and we're about 33rd or 34th in our funding for education. Quite frankly, as a Virginian, that's nothing to write home about. That's nothing to be proud of. But in this Commonwealth right now, we don't have the courage to have the discussion. And it won't happen until folks like yourselves are willing to say, talk about it. Because you know what? Maybe if we talk about it, we realize how bad the situation is. I mean, the governor's announced $858 million worth of cuts. I can tell you, chicken feed. The increased tuition here at Thomas Nelson, chicken feed, that's nothing. Because in order to balance this budget, we're going to have to cut $1.1 billion more. Now, if you think there's been a little bit of pain created with $858 million, when you go throwing on double that, plus about another $400 or $500 million, you're going to see some significant changes in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I think the governor was looking for the tax referendum to send some type of signal as to whether maybe he would start to talk about it. But quite frankly, for someone who can't be held accountable by another election for the job he currently holds, I don't understand why he has vacated the bully pulpit and isn't willing to push the issue and have the conversation and put each and every legislator on the line. Because Delegate Oder is right. There's 140 experts, educational experts in Richmond, and it is their #1 priority every time they run for election. And time after time, my colleagues will go up there and vote against what they said was their #1 priority. And it ain't going to happen with the 140 legislators. You're waiting for us to automatically develop the courage to do it, it won't happen. But if you all start to put the pressure on, and start to communicate, and start to invite legislators in, and start to hold them accountable, and start to raise a little bit of cane, then maybe more than just the 3 of us will start to talk about revenues, and talk about what needs to be done, and talk about priorities. Because right now, the only word I can say is cut, reduce. To the bone, we can do it. We can cut, we can close colleges, make money, get the money we need. We can cut services to the mentally ill, mentally retarded. We can stop funding the little bit of transportation funding we do. We can fire state police officers. We can close prisons. We can turn these people out on the street to get to where we have to go. And if that's the Virginia that citizens like yourselves want, be rest assured there's a lot of folks in Richmond that will be happy to accommodate you. But if that's not the vision you have, Virginia, because it's not mine, you all are going to have to start getting the attention of legislators other than the 3 that came to talk to you tonight. If we don't talk about revenues, we're not going to get to the solution for a lot of the questions that have been presented to us tonight.
Phil said it very eloquently, but I'd just like to add one thing. There are folks up there, and a lot of y'all don't realize this, there are folks up there who have not openly but quietly taken a no tax pledge. I mean, you could have a nuclear attack, you could have anything, and they're not going to raise taxes because they have pledged they're not going to raise taxes. And they don't broadcast that, but secretly deep down inside, they're not going to raise taxes. They'll cut them anytime they want to, but they're not going to raise taxes for any reason. And there are a large group of them up there that feel that way. And they say, this is what my people want me to do. And you look at a vote that occurred on Tuesday in regard to transportation in Hampton Roads, and you get beat 62-38, and they say, I told you so. I told you so. And you say, well, what does that got to do with education? It carries over into education too, because I firmly believe that maybe Mark Warner will get behind an a statewide education referendum, which was proposed in the last session, which didn't pass, to increase the sales tax by 0.5% for educational purposes. But he may do that anyway, but certainly had we in this area passed the transportation referendum, had the same thing occurred in Normal, Virginia, he would be much more encouraged to do that because he would feel like he would have the people behind him. Right now, he feels, as the rest of us do, we're facing a very uphill battle. But the bottom line is, and we can talk about it, we can come to events like this and hear us speak and hear what you all have to say and all that, but the bottom line is in the polling place, in the vote. It's the 62-38. I mean, we can say all we want to, but we got stomped. 62-38. That's a bad defeat, but it's basketball or football or whatever you want. That's a terrible defeat. And that's what worries me about the education that is going to carry over into that field. Sorry to keep going on like this.
No, but Bill mentioned something. Ask the legislators that represent you if they voted for the budget last year. Because if they voted for the budget last year, they voted for $200 million worth of fee increases. Now, to me, if it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, it might just be a duck. Well, if it's something that takes your money out of your pocket for a government service, whether it be additional registration fees for your license plates, for your driver's license, or an additional fee when you go down to process paperwork at the courthouse, it's a tax. And if they voted for the budget last year, they already voted for $200 million worth of tax increases or user fees, or whatever they want to tell you they were. but it was still government taking money from citizens. And some of those people that are going to tell you, yeah, they voted for the budget, also signed that no tax pledge. And so you've got to be willing to put them on notice and ask them the tough questions and hold them accountable. Because I'll tell you, we'll tell you whatever we have to tell you when we come back in March to make you think we're the most wonderful people in the world, so you vote for us in November. No one's ever held me accountable after a session for any of the votes I cast. And I go talk to plenty of groups, and nobody asks a tough question. And if you all don't want to accept the civic responsibility of voting and holding elected officials accountable, you'll get exactly what we think you want. And right now, as was mentioned, don't talk about revenues. Don't talk about needs. Don't talk about priorities. Let's just cut this budget.
Let's see if I can ask a tougher question. This is number 10 on your list. That's a combination, actually, 10 and another one. Isn't the money for Virginia's road system supposed to come from the Lotto South, personal property tax, and state county vehicle sticker proceeds? Why do we need to find other funding sources? And then kind of as a corollary, exactly where is the money from the lottery going? Is that harder?
No.
Okay, let's start. Okay.
You feel correct me if I'm wrong, but I've done a lot of looking into the lottery recently because I've got some ideas for maybe there's an opportunity for some revenue source in the lottery. What I understand from the lottery is that the lottery generates $1.1 billion a year in sales. It sounds like a lot of money. But about 650 million, I'll just use round numbers, 650 million has to go out in winnings. Otherwise, nobody plays the lottery. So there goes 650 million. About 350 million goes back to the localities for education. And then there's about $100 million that's left over that goes, obviously, to purchase the tickets, pay for the advertising, pay the vendors who distribute the lottery tickets. It's basically the overhead and administration of running the lottery program. The money, it's very interesting because the lottery really raised its ugly head during this entire transportation referendum. I said that in my opening statement. And what I meant by that was everybody said we were told the lottery was going to go towards education. I've since been told when I challenged people about that in Richmond, they said, no, it wasn't supposed to go to education, it was supposed to go to things like education. So, I know. And I guess if I could just put it, just to kind of tell a little story that I did, what happened was that Governor Wilder came in, he had a huge deficit, he had to balance the deficit. I wasn't there, these gentlemen I'm sure can expound upon it. But the money was a great source of revenue, and so it went into the general fund. And you think, well, that's really bad, the Democrats really did a bad thing there. Well, the Republicans came along, and the Republicans, of course, the great knights that were going to save the world, turned around and said, we're going to take all the lottery money that's got to go to education. And so they did. Well, when it went to education, you think, okay, well, that's extra money now in education. Well, actually, no. It just replaced the money in there, and they moved it back over to the general fund. It was a shell game. And again, I'm new at this, so if there's a better way to explain it, then I'd go to my more experienced, not senior, more experienced delegates. But we really missed an opportunity with the lottery fund. You heard me mention, you're going to say if we do identify revenue sources, I really want to see it targeted to specific fixes, because we missed a great opportunity. If you go to the state of Georgia, where my brother goes, and you have a B average in high school, B or better average in high school, you actually can go to higher ed, like Georgia Tech or UGA, for free, because all of their lottery money went to higher education. I mean, that was the opportunity that Virginia missed when we squandered the money, or we didn't direct it the way we could have, or whatever the reason was. So the lottery is a very sensitive thing. It's a real period of trust. I can tell you that the lottery is now going to education. Maybe we could tweak the lottery so we don't spend so much money on advertising. It just infuriates me to listen to a football game on Saturday or Sunday and see that the lottery is sponsoring the football game. And I just don't get that. The lottery's already on TV, twice a day? It's on the radio twice a day. There's drawings all the time. I mean, it's in every 7-Eleven, everywhere you go, they're advertising it. There's banners up on the highways. I just simply don't understand why we have to invest every time you turn around the lottery is being promoted. Maybe that money could be, the advertising budget could be cut, and maybe some of that money could be redirected. I know the lottery would scream and say, well, if you cut the advertising, people won't buy as much. There are just things like that we've got to look at. We've got to find ways to spend our money smarter. We just don't have as much as we used to have to spend.
Well, Glenn was right about the lottery. It is all going to education now. But I think people heard what they wanted to hear back in 1987, which was before any of us were in the legislature. Because I heard some of the proponents. And if they were talking to educators, they said the lottery money could go to education. If they were talking to the elderly, the money could go to senior health care. In Northern Virginia, they said the money could go for transportation. The question on the ballot clearly told everybody where the money was going. The question said it was going into the general fund. What does the general fund fund? It funds everything. It funds public education. It funds health care. It funds public safety. It wasn't until about 4 years ago that we actually said, you know, there were some people out there telling folks and creating the perception that it was going to education. That's where it ought to go. We did a constitutional amendment, and the citizens went and voted again on a lottery issue. And this time, all the money's profits are going back to localities for public education, K through 12. And the proviso there is that currently by law, 50% of that money has to be used for non-reoccurring costs. Most of your school divisions are using that for school construction related things. The other 50% of what they send back can be used for whatever the school division determines. So the question about the transportation money, the Lotto South is lottery profits in Virginia. Those lottery profits are going back to localities for education. The other things that were mentioned are things that do fund transportation. The reason we need additional revenues is because the needs for transportation in Virginia are $40 billion. Just this past year, we had to eliminate 30% of the transportation projects that we had agreed to do because VDOT was broke. We didn't have the money to honor 30% of the contracts that we had already entered into because the motor fuels taxes and the different fees and things that are related to transportation and tolls and those types of things are not producing the level of revenue that we need to meet the needs. Now, $40 billion is a lot of money. It's almost as much as Glenn has in his pocket. But again, if we've got needs, then let's identify those needs, let's prioritize those needs, let's establish what type of revenue it's going to take to meet those needs, and then have a conversation about revenue, which is what we tried to do in Hampton Roads. And the citizens said they didn't trust us, that we would divert the money. Unfortunately, we have stolen from every trust fund that we could steal from back in the recession of the 90s so that we could balance the budget and stick our chest out and said we did it without raising taxes. We had just started repaying those trust funds to the level they used to be in 1991 when this new round of recession came around. So we had just caught up. Now we're going to see additional cuts to higher education and everything else. Again, it gets back to, if we're unwilling to have the conversation about revenues, the transportation system is going to remain inadequate, funding for public education and higher education are going to remain inadequate, funding for public safety is going to remain inadequate, funding for health care is going to remain inadequate, and if there's any other projects or initiatives that you think are important, funding for those are going to remain inadequate. That's the bottom line. We don't generate the revenue to meet the needs that I think citizens are going to be coming to expect in the near future.
Let me just mention three things on this. One, you might find it interesting that in Northern Virginia, they've had quite a battle up there as to whether they were going to have a region-wide referendum solely for transportation or whether they were going to have one solely for education, increase the taxes solely for education, or whether it was going to be a half-cent for each, half-cent for transportation, half-cent for education. Those who wanted transportation only finally won out. There were those in Northern Virginia, Dick Stanislaw from Fairfax being one of them, who said that it would never pass in Northern Virginia unless education was on there. that transportation alone would doom it. It looks as though he was right. Whether anything will surface in the future, pairing transportation and education, I don't know. I don't know whether it'd be a good idea to do it or not, but I just think it's interesting that that was a real possibility at one time. Second thing is everyone seems to beat VDOT over the head, and there's no question that in recent years VDOT has really gone down considerably. But many years ago, I understand Virginia probably had the best transportation system in the country, but it's been a long while ago. I will say this, the new man, Phil Suquette, is very impressive. I heard him in Suffolk just recently. He and the Secretary of Transportation, Whit Clement, were there. And all of the local officials who attended appeared to be very impressed with what he was doing. He is really a good hands-on manager. He is telling it like it is. He's gotten rid of some people. You read about that in the paper with watching some on their computers, watching things they shouldn't be watching, that type of thing. But he's really going to be doing some good things, and I hope the confidence of the public in VDOT will increase as a result of that. And let me just say one final thing in regard to the referendum, transportation referendum that just occurred here. People just kept on saying, one of the reasons why, the state of Virginia should be doing this, the localities shouldn't be doing it. Well, if you look back at all these bridges and tunnels and so forth, they were built by local people with local codes for the most part. The state of Virginia didn't do it. And can you imagine the trouble that Glenn and Phil and I would have to go back to the General Assembly and try to convince somebody from Big Stone Gap or Roanoke that they should raise their gas taxes 21 cents to pay for improvements in Hampton roads? I mean, they'd laugh us out of the room. So it was totally unrealistic to think about that. And there was so much misinformation about this whole thing. I had a very well-educated person, in fact, she's a teacher with my wife. My wife came on and said, this teacher's very bright, she's going to vote against it because there's no mass transit money in there. And I said, well, there is mass transit money in there, because I know a bunch of people are opposing it because there is mass transit money in there. But here was a highly educated person that thought there was no mass transit money in the Hampton Roads transportation referendum. So when we get situations like that where people don't really understand what's going on, it's awfully hard and very frustrating to get something like that passed.
Let me go through a couple more because people are prepared and then we'll go back. Let's change gears a little bit and try to go to a different area since we've gotten a pretty clear understanding.
Got anything funny you'd like to ask?
I'm looking for something, but I'm having a hard time.
Any good news?
Good news. We're glad you're here. I have to get that. Let me see if I can find it. There are no funny questions here, no personal ones either. Okay. Here's a little different one. Do you think the state should implement stronger gun control laws in the wake of increased violent action with guns?
And it's my perspective that if we would just try to enforce the laws that we currently have, you wouldn't be talking about any more gun control laws. We've got gun control laws, upon gun control laws, upon gun control laws. As a matter of fact, just today, the Attorney General, United States Attorney General, designated Virginia as the first place to try the individuals that are alleged to be the snipers up in Northern Virginia. The reason was because of Virginia's laws. This past session, we passed the terrorism law, which says you don't necessarily have to identify the person that pulled the trigger if they are involved in a terrorist act, and clearly those snipers are creating a lot of terror throughout the Northern Virginia region, but also in every corner of Virginia. And so, because of the laws that we have, we've been identified as having strong laws in order to possibly prosecute these individuals. So I don't think it's so much a need for more laws. I think the bigger problem is enforcing the laws that we have. It's already illegal for teenagers to have firearms. It's illegal for felons to have firearms. It's illegal for individuals who are known to have mental illness to have firearms. it's illegal for people that have been involved in domestic violence to have firearms. But I'll tell you what, there's a lot of those folks to which it's illegal for them to have firearms walking around with firearms. So I don't believe it's a problem with the law. I believe it's more of a problem with the enforcement of the laws that we currently have on the books.
The governor's staff came down and had breakfast with me I guess about a week ago now. And one of the questions I asked them was, I said, when you were running for governors, you said that Gilmore had allowed the state police department to be down by 200 state troopers, and that how unconscionable that was, because on September 11th, when obviously the first line of defense for us is our state troopers, when they start responding to something like that, we were down 200 state troopers from where we should have been, where the state said we should be. I said, well, did you fill those positions? And they said, we sure did. I said, so we're at full force now? They said, no, not really. We're actually down 300 troopers now. And I said, what happens? And they said, well, we have great training programs in Virginia. Matter of fact, we have some of the best training programs around. And so we do a really good job training our troopers, but they can make more money in West Virginia, North Carolina, other states. And so they come here, they get trained, we put them on the force, and then they immediately start applying for jobs in other states, and they leave as soon as they can get one of those other jobs. So, you know, I tend to agree with Phil. We've got lots of problems that need to be addressed, and in my mind, that's one of them. We've got to fund our police departments, give them the best equipment. We've got to enforce the laws we have, and we've got to make sure our police officers are paid.
Our questions on gun control, as I understand. Let me say just 3 things. Well, 4 things, I guess. First thing, I grew up on a farm in Isle of Wight County. My family still owns a farm. I hunted practically every day when I was a teenager. Always rode around my pickup truck with a gun in the rack on the back. So I've used guns quite a bit. But I think we have to be pretty reasonable about it. And I will say I'm not in favor of strict control. How many of you have been to Concord, Massachusetts? I've been there 3 times. It's one of my favorite places. This is where the shot was heard around the world. The revolution started. The revolution started because the British came out from Boston to Concord because they knew the farmers and the villagers had stored guns and ammunition and so forth. They came out on a mission to destroy those guns and the munitions. They didn't realize the farmers had taken them out and had them in farmhouses all around. When they got there, of course, they met the farmers at Concord Bridge, and again, the shot was heard around the world. So we have to realize that we do have the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, but I think we've got to be reasonable about it. And let me mention 2 things where I think that we should be looking. I serve on an interesting committee, the Militia, Police, and Public Safety Committee. You know, in the state of Virginia, you cannot carry a gun into a courtroom. You saw in the paper just recently a former judge who has been convicted of various things tried to go into a courtroom down in Norfolk. His girlfriend had handed him her purse, and he didn't know there was a gun in there. But anyway, you cannot go into a courtroom in Virginia with a gun. And you say, well, why is that? Well, the reason for that is out in Carroll County, out in southwest Virginia, some folks came in with guns and killed 7 or 8 people, including the judge, back in the 20s or 30s. And Virginia passed a law saying that you can't bring guns into the courtroom. You can't take a gun into a church. It's not allowed. You can't take a gun into a restaurant that serves alcohol. It seems to me like all of those are reasonable things to do. If you want to call that gun control, I consider that reasonable gun regulations. And the thing that gets me on this committee, though, is we just had, about 3 weeks ago, we had a meeting. And the only press reporter there, and it gets back to accountability. People don't understand what's going on up there. We have a committee meeting. The only person there, the only reporter there, was R.H. Melton of the Washington Post. And he was there because Delegate Allman had a bill that was really provocative. Mr. Allman, Delegate Allman said he had a bill that said you ought not be able to carry a gun into the capital of Virginia. And that seemed to me like that was pretty reasonable. I mean, we up there during the session, you got hundreds of kids around, you got all sorts of visitors, I mean, just hundreds, even thousands of people milling all around. And as I sat there in the committee, I looked out in the audience, and I could, you know, I don't think I was imagining, I could see some bulges in the coats of some of those folks who were making sure that we were going to vote the right way. And I tell you, it's a little bit scary. Back during the session, I had a bill similar to that, and I said, as I look at it in the audience, I said this to the committee, I said, as I look at it in the audience, the way I'm going to vote on this thing, I'm afraid, I'm not sure I'm going to get out of here alive, because some people get pretty upset about it. But it seemed to me like it was reasonable to not allow guns in the capital of Virginia. Can you go into the capital of the United States with a gun? I don't think so. I don't think so. And it's going to take, you know, somebody's going to have to get killed, or a bunch of people get killed or wounded before somebody will say, well, maybe we ought to do something about that.
Only if it's legislators that get killed, they'll say, thank you. It have to be civilians that get killed.
But anyway, the vote, I think on the committee there were 3 of us that thought it was a good idea to bar guns. I mean, you got police all over the place in the Capitol. I mean, the police everywhere. And we really need to have folks in there with guns to provide protection for the rest of us. And last but not least, let me say this, as a result of these sniper shootings, I don't see why it would hurt anything to at least look into the idea of this ballistic evidence and look into the idea of the possibility of requiring a manufacturer to, and some say they already fire them, I don't know, fire the gun at least one time before they're sold, and take the ballistic fingerprints or whatever they call it, and have that available. I mean, how many people in the sniper thing, if they'd known right from the first bullet, what gun that came from and who owned it at that time, that doesn't mean that person is guilty, maybe the gun was stolen. But at least you know which gun it is and who owned the gun, and you could have started tracking it. How many people died? I forget how many got killed. But I see nothing wrong with that. And I realize a lot of people say, "Oh, this is an invasion of privacy." I could care less, frankly, about the privacy of the sniper. Could care less about it.
I hope that, you said Delegate Hamilton talked to us about accountability. I certainly hope it's not done with a gun. I hope it's by asking open forums like this. This is question number 23, gentlemen. I forgot to give you another last one. Recent studies have suggested that a way to revitalize the local economy is by cultivating the arts, such as music, performance, fine art, rather than only trying to woo industry. According to some economists, the creative types will bring business there because of the desirable quality of the life created. Austin, Texas is often studied as a case history in that instance. The 2 questions from that. First, what do you think about the approach to revitalization? And 2, why then is our legislature cutting funding for the arts? Let's start with Delegate Barlow. He would be good in my speech class. He tells us how many points he's going to cover.
Well, in this case, it could look like just a big one. Well, first of all, let me say that certainly I think it's very important for economic development and just for the quality of life that we do support the arts. And people moving in and businesses considering moving in certainly look at that type of thing. I think one of the major problems that we have, and it's something I think that we can solve and should solve, and that is that we have the problem of every museum coming to us individually and lobbying us individually for their particular museum. I think a much better concept which has been suggested is for us to come up with a certain amount of money for the arts, and then insist that each museum, for example, the museums here in Hampton Roads, that they get together and come up with their priorities to ensure that there's no wasteful overlapping. Each of them buying the same painting or something of that nature, and to use that money to the best advantage. I think that's vitally important, because otherwise each museum going on their own, I don't think that's a good way to handle it.
Let me just add that I brought one of the leading delegates in the House of Delegates to Newport News, and I took him on a tour one day. We went around, we met with different groups of people. We met with educators, and we toured some schools and things like that. We had lunch with several of the mayors from the region, and during that lunch, the mayors, just really beat this member up about how badly cities needed more money and how Richmond wasn't sending enough money down to the cities and so forth. We left that meeting and we went to the Virginia Living Museum, and the Virginia Living Museum, of course, beat him up about how badly the Virginia Living Museum needed money. They did mention, though, that the City of Newport News had made a several $1 million contribution to the Virginia Living Museum, and I was so proud of my city. I was so proud of all the things that we had in the city. And we went and got in the car, and as we shut the door and we started to drive away, he said, "It doesn't sound to me like your city needs very much money. They're giving money away to museums." So I say that, I didn't dare tell him how much we gave Christopher Newport for the Performing Arts Center. I tell you this story just because you just have to understand there's more than just the three of us that are in the House of Delegates. And we certainly see, I mean, in my district alone, I've got 3 or 4 or 5 museums, depending on how you count them, right there in Newport News. And you just have to understand that people in other parts of the state don't see the need the way that we see it. They don't see the benefit, they don't see the quality of life. They have other needs. I mean, they've got schools that they have to shut down because they have no water in Southwest Virginia. There's no drinking water. The drinking water has been mixed up with the drain field from the septic system, so that they can't drink the water in the school system. They've got communities like Hilton Village all up in the mountains where they don't have any drinking water. Eastern Shore, they desperately need jobs. So these other communities, they've just got priorities, and it is foreign to them to even think about a performing arts center or a living museum or Peninsula Fine Arts Center. It's just foreign. They just don't understand it.
And the biggest reason to get to the funding that there's so much trouble funding it is these things are non-state agencies. They're not a function of state government, a constitutional or a statutory function of state government. And Glenn's absolutely right. There are some folks up there that think if we were to take 1 penny and give it to a museum, that was 1 penny too much. They don't seem to be able to understand that the quality of life that museums and other cultural organizations bring people here, either tourists or business and industry, and they add to the economic vitality of a community. It is interesting, there are a few state museums. They all happen to be located in Richmond, and their funding doesn't get cut very often. But for the other the other museums throughout the state, they are very protective about making sure that none of them get classified as state museums, because then the state would fund some of those. It's an unfortunate circumstance, but as long as those museums are going to be non-state agencies, then the battle for funding is always going to be there. And Bill's absolutely correct. If the arts and museum and cultural organization community would come together as a consortium and try to work with some type of dedicated funding formula that would say, hey, for capital expenditures, not operations, but for capital expenditures, can you help us out? Because to the extent that we have the facility, we'll put the programs in the facility that will attract the people here. But even that's going to be an extremely difficult fight in good times. It becomes even more difficult in lean times. And then you have folks in the Senate that will tell you they don't fund non-state agencies. Because if you look at the Senate budget, they don't put a page in there called non-state agencies. They hide all their funding for non-state agencies under agency budgets. and they put millions of dollars to the things they want to put millions of dollars towards, and then try to blame people in the House of Delegates for wasting money on non-state agencies. There's a game that goes on, and as long as non-state agencies are designated as such, they're going to be up against a tough road to hoe.
I think that you've already answered one of the questions. One of them that they had was what will happen to the Mariners Museum and Peninsula Fine Arts Centers now their budgets have been eliminated. And by being non-state, I think Delegate Hamilton answered.
Well, and what you've already started to see at museums across the state is they're reducing staff, they're reducing hours, and they're increasing admission fees. And that's what they have to do. And that's for the ones that are able to survive. They're having to make those types of adjustments.
I'm not sure this would be in the same category, but it's a little different term. Is it possible for Hampton Roads, the area, to support a professional sports team? And if so, how would the peninsula's economy be affected if the team were on the south side?
Well, first of all, anytime you try to do something like it's a very controversial issue. There's some who very strongly want to have major sports complex teams here in the area. Others say no, this is a waste of money. The taxpayers shouldn't be involved in that. All I will say is that it again goes back to this referendum vote on Tuesday. It seems to me like that for those who advocate such sports facilities, they've suffered a major blow because unless you've got good transportation between Northampton roads here on the peninsula and Southampton roads, you're going to have a very difficult time making a sports complex be self-sustaining.
I think it's an issue that we've tried. We've had good people, we've had good companies that have come in and tried to create this, and it just either the timing hadn't been right, or the mix hasn't been right, or whatever. But it's something that has not worked in our region. I think that the vote which we took on Tuesday is going to further erode any opportunity for doing that. And I think there are many reasons for it. I think that one of the reasons that maybe it doesn't work is the ticket prices. I know that even with the income that my wife and I have in our family, the idea of of us buying a season ticket or even buying tickets to go to it, it's really just not how we prioritize our money. So it would be, I don't know how other cities pay for it or how our incomes compare with other cities, but I just don't see it happening in Hampton Roads, and I think Tuesday is a real reflection of the type of regional. It would take a regional effort to bring it here, and I just don't see it happening.
We've had Major League Sports here. We had the Virginia Squires, for those of you that are old enough to remember the American Basketball Association, and they lasted in Virginia for about 4 years before they left. Quite frankly, Hampton Roads, while it may have a lot of people, we're only 87% of the average income in the country. So our population is not making the average income that other metropolitan regions are making. We're not going to pay $45 a ticket to go. I mean, a family of 4 to go see an NBA basketball game, you'd have to take out a second mortgage to spend one night, because by the time you get there, you pay the $10 for the parking. And I mean, if your kids are anything like mine, you're going to get a hot dog, you're going to get sodas, you're going to get everything else. I mean, you'll come out of there with a $300 bill for one ball game. You can sit at home and watch on television, and maybe not even have to have cable to do that. I will tell you, I've made a point to oppose any of these initiatives by the Hampton Roads Sports Authority. It just galls me to think that a multi-million-dollar owner who has a team of multi-million-dollar prima donnas wants me to build them a multi-million-dollar arena where I don't get the concessions from their multi-million-dollar skyboxes or any of the other concessions that they have. And on top of that, I'm going to forfeit the income tax from those multi-million-dollar folks to generate debt back in to pay off the debt for this arena. It ain't going to happen with my vote. Now, it happens because every year when something comes up, I stand up and rail against it. I lose every time. But to me, when you talk about priorities of government, when you're not providing services for public education and you're not providing services for the mentally ill, I'll be damned if I'm going to provide services for those prima donnas that are making more money than any legislator that served 100 years in the Commonwealth of Virginia would ever make. It just is not good government. The federal government did a study about 6 or 7 years ago that indicated they're nice things to have in your community, but they don't contribute to the economic benefit of the region. The only people that have benefited, George Shinn, moved his bunch out of Charlotte, went down to New Orleans, put a bunch of money in his pocket. Who knows how long he'll stay down there? He's liable to move again when the money starts to run out. It's not the right thing to do, and I'm someone that enjoys sports. But we couldn't even hold a major league golf tournament that had been here for 20 years because we didn't have the population base to support it, and we had it in between Richmond and Hampton Roads to draw from two metropolitan areas. And the private sponsor finally realized that paying these people $900,000 for 4 days of golf, was not the most economic thing for them to do in tough times. And we're just not the type of economic income base to support those types of franchises. And I just don't believe it's a role of government to contribute a penny to bring any of those major league sports teams here, unless we own them. And the only team that I know of that's community owned is the Green Bay Packers. And I would support that because they're the stockholders in that organization. But if we're not going to own them, we ought not to be paying for them.
Unfortunately, I am old enough to remember the Virginia Squires. But I do want to indicate, even though we have lost the men's golf tournament, we still have women next year.
And hopefully someone will show up. I'm telling you.
I mean, you're right. I know you're trying.
It's embarrassing that to have this many people that we can't support. I mean, we don't pack the scope for the Admirals, and they're a very successful hockey team. We don't pack Harbor Park. We have a very successful AAA baseball team. And for people to talk about, well, let's bring in a pro football or a pro basketball or a pro hockey team and think we're going to put 18,000 people tonight in an auditorium or 70,000 people tonight in the stadium, it is not going to happen in Hampton Roads. What we could do, we could build a racetrack. If you built a 2.5-mile track for NASCAR and you put it out by Bowers Hill, and if you could get yourself 2 dates with the national races on there, you'd put 300,000 people in the stands, guaranteed. It's the only sport that I believe that could survive in Hampton Roads at a major league level, NASCAR.
I guess mud wrestling doesn't count, right?
Mud wrestling doesn't count.
I want to combine, for time's sake, question 11 and question 25. I'm in the military and have lived in several states, and this is by far the longest completion time I've ever seen on roads. 2 parts. Do the contractors have to pay penalties for failure to complete their work in a given time? And secondly, why don't we complete the current road work before we start new road work projects? Anybody?
I would let take that.
Okay.
The only person that's ever built a road.
That's right. I build roads. We have a couple problems. I'm trying to take this question and deal with it comprehensively. We only have a certain amount of funding. That's the first problem. Imagine if you're building your house and you dug the foundation this year, and you put the foundation in, you put the cinder blocks in, and the next year you built the family room and the kitchen, and the next year you built the living room and a bedroom, the next year you added the garage, and the next year you added the roof over it, and every time you had people come over to show up your house, they all said, gosh, your house is always under construction. Well, it's because I didn't have enough money to do it all at one time. That's the problem. We only get a certain amount of money. That's why we only do Interstate 64 between Mercury Boulevard and Route 17. Well, then we do it between Route 17 and Patrick Green Mall. That's all the money that we have. That's what the transportation referendum was all about. It was going to allow us to do the projects all at one time, tackle big projects, and get big things out of the way. So that's the first problem. It's the best we can do with the money that we have for the projects that we have to work with. Another problem we have is that roads here are very, very expensive. You dig a hole in Hampton Roads and fish jump out. It just is that, the water table is that high. It's very, very difficult to build a road bed that's going to sufficiently hold up the road for the heavy traffic that we have and so forth. So it costs a lot of money to build a road. If you don't have to go on top of the water, then you got to go underneath the water like we do with our tunnels, and that even makes it more expensive. So it's just not that easy just to build a road around here. Finally, the question was, what about penalties? All right, I have dealt with penalties because, again, I've built roads. I've had to hire contractors and negotiate with contractors. It sounds really easy to impose penalties. Let me tell you how difficult penalties are. You put a big penalty on it. Say it's $25,000 a day. Mr. Contractor, when you sign this contract, you're agreeing that if you don't finish this project in 180 working days, then you're going to pay $25,000 a day. Okay, well, if you turn the page in the contract, you'll find out what's defined as a working day. The working day is probably defined by a certain amount of saturation in the soil, a certain amount of sunshine, a certain amount of temperature. Why is temperature important? You can't put asphalt down if it's below 55 degrees. You can't work the earth if it's raining or if it's muddy. You know, as an example, it's rained the last couple of days. The contractor would have submitted you a notice and said, hey, I couldn't work yesterday and today. And you're going, yeah, but the sun came out. I saw it when I was driving here tonight. The sun will be out tomorrow. You can work tomorrow, can't you? He said, well, actually, I can't work tomorrow. The ground's going to be wet. My equipment's going to get stuck. It's going to cost me a whole lot more to work tomorrow. So therefore, I'm going to have to charge you more for it. You sign the change order and I'll work tomorrow. It's a real trade-off between forcing a contractor to go to work, paying him extra. I mean, I will tell you, when I was young and naive, now I'm old and naive, but when I was young and naive, I remember making a contractor go to work one day. I don't know if you know what an excavator is. It's the thing that's on the tracks, and it rotates 360 degrees, and it's got the big arm on it. The poor guy buried the excavator all the way up to the cab, trying to work on a project that I was making work on. I remember a supervisor said, Mr. Owner, I didn't know it was possible to work that kind of equipment. He said, we really can't work to that. I said, I understand. And also, if you make the person work that day, it not only takes them longer, they're going to charge you more. But whereas before you might have had to cut out 6 or 8 inches of soil in order to begin to start building up your road bed, if you work when it's wet, you've got to go down 12, maybe you go down 12 inches. That's more fill you got to put in, it's more you have to haul away. It's really complicated. There are many, many things that can be fixed with VDOT. And they can be done policy-wise, or they can be done legislative-wise. And I'll try not to take up your time by going over those tonight. If you want to see me afterwards, I'll be glad to tell you. VDOT's got to be fixed. In my mind, it's 50% or more of the reason why the referendum didn't pass on Tuesday is because of the lack of confidence in VDOT. And you need to really hold your legislators accountable to make VDOT work better.
I can't add anything to that. Some of the same things that I'd written down in my answer were things that Glenn talked about. We do have penalties, but getting around to being able to enact those penalties, because the acts of nature clause in every one of those, you'd spend more money trying to enforce it than you'd ever collect in the penalty.
I don't have a bit to add to either one of those. Very welcome.
I guess the experience of getting it all covered in mud probably.
Oh, yeah.
This is question number 22. With unemployment figures so high and available jobs so low, what can be done to help older, more experienced yet displaced workers with jobs?
Well, I think that's where the community college system and the workforce development centers are critical to the future economic growth here in Virginia. As industry and economics change, people that were trained to do a job 25, 30 years ago, because of technology and a lot of other things, that job may not even exist. People at your young ages, you may participate in a job in 2 or 3 years that doesn't exist today. So it's critical that we have the infrastructure, the educational infrastructure, through our community college system, through our workforce development centers, to make sure we maintain that high level of skilled workforce to address the needs that business and industry are going to have. I think we're very fortunate here, particularly on the Peninsula, that we've got Thomas Nelson, we've got the Workforce Development Center, and they've done an excellent job, not just in preparing people for the jobs that are there, but more importantly for retraining folks that have had to make adjustments in the work that they do. But from my perspective, we've just got to make sure that infrastructure is solid. 62% of the students that are participating in higher education today in Virginia are doing it through the community college system. I can promise you, the community college system is not getting 62% of the higher education funding. But we've got to do whatever it takes to make sure that the community college system, the workforce development centers, become the backbone of that skilled workforce that we're going to have today, tomorrow, and well into the distant future.
A couple of things. One is that we just got to continue to emphasize to our citizens that they've got to be lifelong learners. I mean, the days of having one job, one skill, and it's going to last you a lifetime, it's just gone. You're gonna have to have multiple skills and be readily adaptable, not only to move from one area to another, but from one skilled job to another skilled job. It's extremely important. And that brings me to the second point. The opportunities have to be there, not only for our young people, K through 12 and into college, but we've got to look at those folks who have had problems in life, the single mother, for example, who needs to leave the home and now earn a living. They've got to have the opportunity to develop those job skills in order to get back on their feet. And that's extremely important. When I was in the Air Force many years ago, I was part of the time I was in Syracuse, New York. I went to a church there, and our minister was a guy named John Tollison, and Reverend Tollison had quit school when he was in about the 5th grade. He grew up on a farm in South Carolina. He quit school in the 5th grade because his father died, and he had to start farming. But later on, he realized he needed an education, and in fact wanted to become a minister. Well, first of all, he had to get a high school education. He said that it was the most humbling experience of his life to go to be in a classroom where he was a tall, lanky guy anyway, to get up, be called to the blackboard by the teacher, to work a math problem, puzzling over it, unable to work it, and then a little kid about a third his height comes up and works the problem. Very humbling experience. But he went on to get his high school education, went on to college, to the seminary, and became a minister. We can't give up on people. Human beings are our major assets, and we've got to give the opportunities for people to make do the best that they can do.
I'll be brief and quick. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell the old, tell the young. Thomas Nelson Community College is where you need to go.
We got that on tape.
Yeah, we did.
We don't have the money the lottery has for advertising, but I think that's a good endorsement. The next question is number 18. I know it doesn't seem like it because we've had a lot of rain lately, but as we all know, water is an issue. What are your feelings about the building of the King William Reservoir?
Well, as someone that has been less than enthusiastically endorsing the King William Reservoir, I'll tell you why. This is another one-shot alternative to try to fix a very complex problem. A reservoir has got to be part of the long-term solution. But if you're going to do water supply for what I consider the distant future, which is more than 30 or 40 years, you're going to have to look at other alternatives such as desalination. You ought to put in place an incentive program for conservation. You ought to start looking at the recycling of water for non-drinking purposes. And when you do all of those things collectively in a comprehensive plan, then I think you've actually put forward something that carries this region well into the future. You know, if this reservoir gets approved and we get it built, then no sooner does the first drop go in it, then we're going to start talking about, now, what are we going to do from the year 2040 to the year 2100? And my position is, why don't we talk about all of those things now? Why don't we start to put in place a comprehensive plan? Maybe the first thing we have to do in that comprehensive plan is a reservoir in King William. I don't know if it is or isn't. But look at this thing from a long-term perspective instead of what's the Band-Aid we can put on it for this 20 years and what will be the Band-Aid we'll put on for the next 20 years. And until we start thinking long range and in a comprehensive fashion, that's all we're going to do, is we're going to jump from one crisis to another crisis to another crisis. So while the King William Reservoir, my opposition, or concern, not opposition, because I did sign a letter of support, was that we were only looking at one alternative instead of putting together a full package. It looks like the reservoir may get the permits that it needs. I would hope that immediately the region would say, okay, that's the done. Now let's put together the comprehensive plan. Unfortunately, having been around here for a couple of years, I don't know that we think much beyond the end of our noses. And we'll be back 20 years saying, what are we going to do now? Wringing our hands. We've got to start thinking proactively in a much more comprehensive fashion than what we do. Reservoirs are going to be a part of it. Desalination needs to be a part of it. Conservation needs to be a part of it. Recycling for non-drinking purposes needs to be a part of it. And if we're unwilling to consider those things actively and start putting some initiatives towards it, and you know, we talk about paving Virginia, we'll just dig holes and fill it up with water. We've got to start thinking a little more creatively and innovatively than what we have, in my perspective, from the past.
Phil's absolutely right. You know, we Americans, we're people of action. You know, you got to be moving, you got to be doing something all the time. The old saying is, don't just sit there, do something. I mean, that's that attitude. Don't just sit there, do something. But I think the better thing to do is don't just do something. Sit there and think. Sit there and think very long and hard as to what we need to do. And as Bill has indicated, we've got to look at a wide variety of water resources and have implement those, plan and implement those in an integrated way, in an economical way that's helpful to the taxpayer. Otherwise, we're going to really have some major problems. Phil Shuket, the new VDOT guy, impresses me along that line. He tells his people, don't just do these plans, come up with these plans, rework the plans, meet together with all other departments, and make sure before we do anything, make sure that this is the best possible plan. And that's what we need to do in regard to water resources.
Everybody said some really good things about the Kingway Reservoir. I'm going to add to this and tell you that we have a window of opportunity to build the Kingway Reservoir right now with the Corps of Engineers has changed their position, or is in the process of changing their position. The governor of Virginia is under an enormous amount of pressure from environmental groups that are telling him to change the permits for the state or not approve the permits from the state. You know, all these things that have been talked about here, desalination, deep water wells, conservation, all those things have certainly been talked about and they're part of it, but the centerpiece of the plan really is the Kingway Reservoir in terms of a regional perspective to carry us at least the year 2040, and we've got to get the governor to not stop this project. So if you're against it, they can do it right now, it's called the governor and add your voice to it. But if you agree that we need to approach this regionally and that there really is no damages being created by this reservoir, then you really need to do what we talked about tonight, be proactive, and send a letter or an email to the governor.
Unfortunately, we only have time for one more question, and most of these questions were written prior to Tuesday. But this is a burning question, I'm sure, in all of our minds. How much is, number one, gentlemen, how much of the current budget crisis is the result of the car tax reduction, and why don't we raise it again?
The impact in fiscal year 2002, which ended on June 30th, is $825 million. So that's how much it is. You've got a $2 billion shortfall, and the 70% car tax payout fiscal year 2002 was $825 million. And if you noticed in the summer, most of your automobile manufacturers were offering 0% interest. There was the one industry that's not slumping in Virginia has been the auto dealers. They've been doing very well in turning over their inventory because of some of the manufacturers' interest, offers and things of that nature. So the $825 million is surely going to be a higher amount in fiscal year 2003. Now the other question is, why don't we just raise it? That's easier said than done. Look, we're not willing to talk about revenues. We're not willing to talk about needs. We're not willing to talk about priorities. Why in the world do you think? People say we can't be trusted anyway. So here we've implemented something, we're going to go back in 4 years and change it. We just reinforce the distrust the evilness of those that you all elect us into Richmond, I don't think you're going to see any effort to remove that tax or even roll it back, although there are some legislators in the South Side that don't get any benefit from it. But the Northern Virginia delegation, which are the ones that get 23% of that $825 million, goes to Northern Virginia. So that great sucking sound that you hear is that car tax money heading right up there to Northern Virginia. I just don't think you're going to see it. As a matter of fact, this administration, through its Secretary of Finance, has declared the car tax is now an entitlement, and citizens are entitled to this, much like the accusation of welfare was an entitlement that had been created. Well, it's amazing that entitlements were bad when it was welfare, but entitlements are good when it's car tax. But $825 million this year will be higher than that next year, 23% of it going to Northern Virginia. There won't be any significant effort to repeal it back or even roll it back.
Phil, how much, didn't we cut $3.8 billion out of the budget already?
The last session we cut $3.8 billion, and we have to cut $2 billion more.
Yeah, so we're looking, so it's a $5.8 billion shortfall in the budget, and the car tax is $825 million. Obviously, that's a lot of money, but it's not. I mean, the question here, is how much of a result you can see. It's only a part of it, and it's not even a big part of it. There's $5 billion over and above that.
That's true, but it is the largest new state expenditure that's been implemented over the last 4 years. And when people say you got to cut your expenditures, I would think that you'd go after your newest expenditures and your biggest expenditures. I mean, that's the way some logical people think. But when you tell them that the newest expenditure and the largest expenditure is the car tax reimbursement to localities, then they say, oh no, you can't do that. And you need to understand, we didn't reduce the car tax 1 penny. We didn't reduce it 1 penny. All we did is shifted the burden of payment. It used to be the individual citizen paid 100% of the local car tax. Now the citizen pays 30% of the local car tax, and the state pays the other 70% for you. So we didn't reduce, eliminate anything about the car tax, except shift the burden of who paid it. You only paid 30% directly. The Commonwealth pays the other 70% on your behalf.
Well, as I indicated earlier, I think in regard to the car tax, the way it was set up, there were going to be triggers in there that if the revenue didn't come in, then we would not be phasing it out on schedule. What happened was that when we were at 47.5%, then Governor Gilmore decided that despite the fact that the revenue was down, he found a loophole in the law by saying that he could use the tobacco settlement funds that would be spread out over, 25 years or so. You could use that and count that as revenue, and therefore the triggers did not go into effect. Therefore, you jump from 47.5% to 70%. Initially during the campaign, the cost was only going to be $600 million. Now it's over double that when it's completely phased out. So it's a very expensive thing, but I agree with the other two gentlemen that it's going to be here. It's we're going to have to live with it, and because there's no support for no significant support for reimposing that tax. I think, however, that we need to have a complete review, complete overhaul of the entire tax system.
Absolutely.
And that we had a commission. We've had commission after commission after commission. The most recent one, every commission has an excuse why they can't come up with anything. The latest one is, well, we can't do anything because things are so bad and it's a terrible time to be even considering something like this. Well, the fact of the matter is, there's no good time to consider tax reform, but we are trying to squeak along with a tax system here in the Commonwealth of Virginia that was forged years and years ago that simply does not work effectively now. It's not as fair as it should be. It doesn't produce the revenue it should produce, and we really need to to overhaul it completely.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to introduce a person I guess doesn't need introduction to us, Dr. Shirley Pippins, president of the college, for her words.
Well, thank you, Betty, for doing a wonderful job tonight. And thank you, Professor Wolf, for creating this forum and making this possible. As I sat in the back of the room, I had this feeling that our legislators are feeling a little bit unappreciated and feeling that we don't respect them and that we don't appreciate their work. I'm here to tell you that that is not the case here at Thomas Nelson Community College. And when you go back to Richmond, I want you to know that you have our support and we appreciate all that you've done. So I made this long list to share with this audience of the wonderful things that you've done to perhaps make you feel better and give us some more reasons to support you. You may not know that when we went into this fiscal year, the round of cuts that took place, the community colleges were protected. We received a smaller amount of cuts. And in the second and most recent round of cuts, the community colleges received the smallest amount of cuts. When you look around the campus, you see renovated spaces, the student center, the library, Moore Hall where we are today. That is the result of the work of our delegates. If you see new things, that beautiful Workforce Development Center and the ISS building that you walk through, that is the work of our legislative delegation. And just yesterday, there were disappointments, but we felt a great deal of pride. I guess it was 2 days ago, Tuesday.
I'm glad we had fun.
The general obligation bond passed, bringing $22+ million to Thomas Nelson Community College. Funds to renovate old spaces on this campus and to build a new campus. And I want to say thank you to our delegation. I thank all of you for coming out tonight and join us in the lobby for refreshments.
You have something to say, Phil?
Yeah, I brought my legislative newsletter that I mailed out about 3 weeks ago. A lot of the information in here dealt with the referendum questions from last Tuesday, but there is a legislative survey on the back of this that asks for your opinion on 10 different issues. And I'll have them up here on the table if any of you are interested in having your opinion counted in the legislative survey that I'm doing. It touches on some of the issues that we touched on tonight about cigarette taxes and car taxes and sales taxes and alcohol taxes and reducing funding for education, higher ed, and those types of things. You may want to weigh in. It's pretty simple. You just have to circle yes, no, or undecided.
President Pippin, I also want to say that I've been frustrated since the transportation referendum failed, because I know that you're frustrated because you get stuck in traffic. I just want to say that I had taken it upon myself to design a Plan B. You heard a lot of discussion about the fact that there was no Plan B. Well, I want you to know that as a member of the Transportation Committee for the House of Delegates, that I have been working on a Plan B since the referendum failed the other night. And I wanted to help y'all with it tonight. It's a training program. And what it is if you are pulling out in traffic, 1 beep tells people that you're coming. 2 beeps means that you need them to move over because you're coming through, and that means that you're in a significant hurry. Please move out of the way right away.
I like in a forum a couple of weeks ago, the delegate Odom was asked for his alternative plan if it was defeated, and I thought it was a genius plan. Leave early and take food. He has since modified it to take something to read. I love your creativity.
President Pippins, let me just close with a couple of points. One is, we got a bunch of legislators in the area, only 3 of us here tonight. I'm sure the others had some good reasons not to be here. But I know I can speak for the 3 of us. These 2 are Republicans, I'm a Democrat. But I think all 3 of us anyway, share the idea that we really need to work together on a bipartisan basis in Richmond. This is a significant problem, and hopefully we can get more people like the 3 of us who feel that way, because we've got so many natural differences between each of us from all over the state without creating artificial differences in the way of party affiliation. And secondly and last, I'd just like to say that I think it is extremely important, and we mentioned this earlier, extremely important for all of our citizens to work as hard as possible to hold your legislators accountable, including us. I mean, sometimes we don't like some of the tough questions you ask us, but this is why we're there. I mean, we're supposed to be able to cope with those tough questions and to be held accountable to you. And we appreciate you being here tonight to help us in that regard.
We have nice refreshments in the lobby, and all three of the gentlemen had indicated they would be willing to